Hello and welcome to today's webinar hosted by the IEEE Standards Association. My name is Brett Halseel and I am the event producer for today's webinar presentation on the topic of IEEE Standards Association and NEPAD webinar, How Standards Advance Technology for Humanity. We have a live in-room audience in Johannesburg, South Africa at NEPAD agency. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand it over to the wonderful speakers to briefly introduce themselves and afterwards dive straight into the content. So Sri and Moira, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Brett, for the introduction. And welcome from myself as well to all of our participants. I am Moira Patterson. I work for the IEEE Standards Association, and I am responsible for our global engagement with stakeholders worldwide, helping to share awareness of standardization and how standardization can contribute to economic growth and business environment and individual career improvements as well. And we will talk today about a few high-level topics related to this. You see the outline here, and I would like to note that we will have questions at the end, so please do share any questions you have along the way in the WebEx with Brett, and we look forward to answering any questions you may have. Before we get started, I would like to express our gratitude to NEPAD for hosting us here today. We are very pleased to be here in Johannesburg, and we thank Tuela Narendra and her team for their efforts in working with us on this webinar. So thank you very much. We also are very pleased to have this cooperation under the cooperation MOU that IEEE and NEPAD signed earlier this year, and this is one of our first cooperative activities, so we are very excited about this. About IEEE. IEEE is the world's largest professional association advancing technology for humanity. This is a very important goal for us, and our over 400,000 members worldwide contribute to this. Of these members, we have over 6,000 members on the African continent and in over 160 countries total. The technical breadth of IEEE is unmatched in the world. We have 46 technical societies and technical councils. How do we engage with the stakeholders? We have many paths, including conferences. We have over 1,600 conferences every year on the wide variety of technical topics we have. We have around 4 million technical documents in our library, and we have over 175 top-cited periodicals that serve the technology community and communities working related to that. The IEEE Standards Association is a unit within IEEE, and we are a global consensus building platform that helps nurture, develop, and advance global technologies through facilitating standards development and other consensus building and collaboration activities around technology. It is a key venue for innovators and other people with technology interests to come collaborate and solve technical problems or societal problems where there is a technical solution. We also bring together industry players, governments, and other technologists to ensure that we have the broadest possible set of stakeholders involved. Our work drives the functionality, capabilities, and interoperability of a wide range of products and services that really transform the way people live, work, and communicate. One example that we like to cite that really demonstrates that is the standard IEEE 802.11, wireless LAN. That standard was initially developed to connect cash registers wirelessly. Who would have foreseen how it would change the world? Now we depend on it to communicate, and that communications infrastructure has enabled entire businesses with new applications and has changed our lives as individuals as well, enabling us to communicate around the world much more easily and much more affordably. What technology areas does IEEE work in? We really cover the gambit from a wide variety of standards or technology areas, from broadcast technology to energy to transportation, digital health, and communications and smart grid. All of those are, of course, key technologies, and all of it lives under the umbrella of IEEE. We also are an independent global community of experts and technologists. We are not affiliated with any governments or with any other interests, but we are really a membership organization that works with all the relevant stakeholders to accomplish our mission. Standards help grow markets and are developed where there is a demand, a market demand for solutions for interoperability of products. And IEEE has a process that is based on the WTO's principles for international standardization. So we follow the international best practices, including principles such as openness, transparency, and impartiality. We also have an increasingly sophisticated set of e-tools to ensure that people can participate remotely from around the world to decrease the need for travel and the associated costs that come with that. So we try to facilitate a very inclusive environment so that all people who want to participate have access to participation. Now, coming to Africa specifically, I want to focus on a few key programs and engagements that we have. One key community that we engage with is the national standards bodies. There are several ways that we work closely with national standards bodies. One is to enable adoption of IEEE standards. This is beneficial to the national standards bodies as it enables them to save on resources. Where global standards exist, they can leverage existing standards. So they don't need to invest in developing them new. It also helps with technology transfer and interoperability when they can use standards that exist and lead to matching requirements to other markets. So import-export is facilitated and supported through that. We also engage in capacity building activities such as staff training and exchange on standardization best practices with these organizations. We also engage with regulators and other experts. We have a robust standards education program, and we engage with industry and innovators around all kinds of global but also local challenges that they want to address and solve through technology. And we will talk about these in a little more detail. The IEEE-SA Fellowship Program is an educational and capacity building program to engage participants from developing and emerging economies. And we have piloted that program last year, and it's growing now. We engage with experts, often from the government community, regulators, national standards bodies, to connect them to our experts, to have them engage in our meetings, either to learn about process or to learn about specific technologies. Through that, they gain a lot of knowledge and also contacts and connections to the right experts, and that then facilitates ongoing participation if that is of interest. And of course, that also helps with networking around the world and with contacts and world-class leading experts in those technology areas. The IEEE Government Engagement Program is another platform, and this is focused specifically at government ministries and agencies that have an interest either in standardization directly or in some of the fields of interest such as ICT or energy. And again, we help make connections, and it encourages a dialogue between the governments and the IEEE standardization communities to understand the needs and how we can work together to address priorities. Technology policy is another important topic for us, and I just want to highlight a few key initiatives. The Internet Initiative is an initiative where we focus on enabling the dialogue between technology experts and policymakers. It is more and more necessary to have those communities work together to solve problems and to help bring internet connectivity to the next billion and to connect the unconnected. Another important initiative to be aware of is ethical considerations in intelligent systems and in technology more broadly. IEEE has a number of activities related in this space, including some standards projects, which focus on data governance, on addressing bias in technology and in intelligent systems and other related topics. And finally, I want to just briefly highlight another type of activity that we have, which is really a bottoms-up activity. IEEE is a membership organization, and we facilitate communities to also solve problems locally in a bottom-up manner. And this project, the Tawassul project, comes out of Tunisia, and local members decided that they wanted to help bring ICT connectivity to local schools and train children in digital literacy to enable them to take advantage of all the technologies we are talking about. So this is a very important activity and one more aspect that we wanted to highlight. And with that, I will hand over to my colleague, Sri Chandra.
So next a few slides, I will talk about a little bit deeper dive into what standards do. Highlight some of the key stakeholders who participate in standards and why they participate in standards. And a few examples I will quote, which I feel is quite relevant in today's context, and also our global collaboration and standards education. So that will take about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we can go over to question and answers from there. I would like to start with what do standards do, or what are standards, and there are various aspects that standards provides, and here you can see in this particular slide I have highlighted some of the keywords, and I think that is at the core and essence of standards development. Today, if you look at how we kind of connect with each other and the devices that we use and where the technologies are converging, one of the key aspects of standards development is to ensure interconnectivity, interoperability, and compatibility of devices. Without that compatibility, we will not be able to work in an efficient fashion the way we do. Moira spoke about IEEE 802.11 or the wireless LAN. Today, we use our cell phones. First thing we do when you are at the airport or at the hotel, we say that, okay, can I get access to free Wi-Fi? And how does that happen? That is because there is a standard that enables to do that. It allows your device to connect to a router in a seamless fashion, independent of who these manufacturers are. So I think that's a fairly strong point that standards brings to the table. It also improves your confidence in purchasing a particular product. It talks about reliability, services that people use every day, and we always look at when you are purchasing a particular product, you look for certain logos, certification marks that improves the fact that you are guaranteed of certain assurances when you purchase these products developed by standards. It helps you compare products. When you are purchasing a phone today, there might be a phone which might have support Bluetooth and another one that may not support Bluetooth, and based on your requirements, you will decide which product to purchase based on what you need. And something that is at the heart of all of this is to promote international trade. What I mean by that is, by having a standards document or a framework, it allows people from various parts of the world to develop products and services and be able to provide to other parts of the world without having to meet them face to face, but you have a dialogue, you have a language. We all speak different languages in all these different countries, but standards help us commonize these way we communicate. And if I go and say that my interface will support these kind of features, will comply to the standard, then the purchaser of the equipment understands what you mean by that and how he or she can integrate into their systems. So in the next few slides, I will talk about the stakeholders. Who are these stakeholders? The industry, users, government, public sector, and individuals like you and me, and what it all means. What are the different perspectives we take when we talk about standards development? Standards are extremely integral to the industry. Without the presence of an industry, we would not have standards. What I mean to say by that is, ultimately, the standards, when in English they say when rubber hits the road, that is when industry develops products. And when industry develop products, they want to make sure that they are developing products based on certain standards, and they want to differentiate their product with the rest of the products that are being developed to address the same space by saying that they are adhering to standards, and then they can have a global reach. And that doesn't happen easily. There is, we have to understand that there is significant investment of money, staff time, and personnel, expertise, and intellectual property. A lot of times intellectual property has a very important play when it comes to standard development. But at the same time, industries recognize the importance of these things and are able to willing to put that effort in developing these standards. What that enables is it takes the innovation to the next level. That means you are able to build a platform and take innovation on the applications, on building various interesting applications on top of that particular platform. For the user, how does it matter? Now we have a choice of purchasing products. So customer choice is very important. And what does choice do? It drives cost of the product down. When we have a lot of people developing products to a particular standard, then we ensure that the cost to the end user is coming down. You would always see when a new product comes into the market, it's very expensive. As you have more and more players, and as the technology matures, you will see that the same product is 1/10 the price within about 4 years. And these are really enabled by these kind of ecosystems. The other aspect you have, which is very tightly coupled with customer choice, is no vendor lock-in. That means you as a end user, and a customer has a choice of purchasing which product, and this is a product that might go into a larger ecosystem, and it doesn't mean that the whole ecosystem needs to go to the same vendor. You have a choice of putting different parts of this ecosystem from different vendors as long as they comply to certain standards, and you can piece it together. So now, how does the public sector look at standards? What is the importance for them when we talk about global standards and standards development? Firstly, we are living in a world where we have emerging technologies where the products and services are almost the same wherever you go in this world. We are traveling here, myself and Moira, from different parts of the world, but we are able to use the devices in a seamless manner. So the idea here is to eliminate costs of developing in-house standards where it is most practical, where the experts have come together, put their expertise, and developed certain framework and building blocks. And that enables automatically the decreasing cost that I already mentioned, and promote efficiencies and economic cooperation. When I talk about economic cooperation, I talked about the international trade when I spoke about what do standards do, and that is very important when we are talking from a perspective of the public sector. And these are all done through adhering to the WTO principles. So when I talk about standards to individuals, whether it be people from the government or just independent users or people from the industry, the first question I get when I say come and participate in standards and come and participate in IEEE standards development, the first question I get is, what is in it for me? Why should I come and participate in standards development activities? And it's a interesting and a very important question. You have to understand why it is important for individuals to come and participate. I believe that there are certain aspects of participation that standards enables you. It is a easiest platform where you can meet a pool of experts who are developing standards. These are experts from the industry who are coming together, and now you want to understand a certain technology space. You want to see what is happening in this technology space, how is the technology evolving, what is the perspectives of the different companies and the different regions as they evolve this particular technology by developing the standard, and how can I access this information. The best way to access this information is to able to communicate with this pool of experts and join this community. So in a particular region, when we form these communities, when we form these individuals, it builds community together. And eventually what that drives is technology leadership. As you come and participate in standards development activities, you learn the technology. At certain stage, you become comfortable, you start gaining some expertise based on your outside work and what you learn through the standards communities, and you start contributing to this. It definitely helps technology growth in the regions. And there are various ways how you can contribute and participate to standards development activities. I always say to people that at the worst case, you come and observe. You understand what is happening there. You want to learn. As students, as young professionals, you want to understand how this technology is evolving. You just come and observe. And as you are comfortable and as your skills improve, then your participation will grow stronger, and you start contributing to the documents, and eventually perhaps take leadership position in some of these activities. So how do we develop standards within the IEEE Standards Association? We have two methodologies by which we develop standards, and both are equally powerful bottom-up methodologies. One of them is an individual method where we pretty much talk about one person, one vote, or one individual, one vote. So any number of individuals can participate from the same organizations or other organizations, but when they come to that particular table to discuss standards, they are representing their own individual expertise, and they are representing their views on that particular standard and vote accordingly. On the other side, we have what we call as the entity or the corporate method. Here it is one corporate, one vote, or one entity, one vote. Any number of individuals in an entity can participate in the standards development activity, but ultimately there's a designated voting member. Whenever there is a voting that happens, we go to the designated member and he or she votes on behalf of that particular organization. And the corporate members can be a research institution, an academic institution, an industry, a government organization. It can be any of these, as each of them are important stakeholders in the standards development activity. So how do we develop standards? What is the standards process flow? And this is a extremely simplified view. Sometimes the devil is in the details, but I think it captures the essence of our development process. Anybody in the world can come up with an idea and come to the IEEE and say that there is a gap. I have an idea by which standards can fill that gap. So we work with that individual to explore that idea a little bit further and understand whether this has already been solved as a problem through a standard, or there is really a need to develop a new standard, or in some cases modify an existing standard, to address that particular gap. So in that process, we have a procedure called the project authorization request. It's a very simple form, and we affectionately call it as the PAR form, and a lot of people within the IEEE refer to this as the PAR process. We work with the individual or the entity, in the case of entity standards, to fill up this document, which essentially identifies what is the scope and purpose for which we are coming together. That is extremely important for us. The scope that you identify in the PAR process is key, because what happens is, once the project is approved by the Standards Association to form a working group, we send this document to our communities to see interest of others to join in this particular standards activity. So typically when I get a document or a call for interest, I look at the scope. I see if the scope is important or not, or whether it's relevant to me in the work that I do, and based on that, I make a call on participating in that particular standard development activity. Then once the PAR is approved, we develop draft standards and we go to consensus ballot. Consensus ballot is a formal process by which people to come together and vote on that particular standard. And then once the vote approval is passed, then we go to the standards board for their approval and then publish the particular standard. The timeline, if in the PAR process, there is a question that says how much time will it take to finish the standard, and the maximum time they give is 4 years. On an average today, we look at, we have a statistic, I think it's about 2.7 to 2.8 years that it takes from a PAR to publishing. People always talk about, how long does it take for a standard to get published, and that is the effort that we take as of today. The standard is valid for a period of 10 years. After 10 years, it needs to be revised, or somebody has to authenticate that the standard is still valid, or we withdraw the standard. So the other platform that we provide is the IEEE Conformity Assessment Program. What is conformity assessment? It basically ensures that, so now we have developed a standard. How do we ensure that product manufacturers are actually complying to that particular standard? What is the methodology that we deploy? Standards development is voluntary, bottom up. Standards adoption is voluntary, bottom up. And similarly, the certification program is also voluntary, bottom up method. So the aim of this conformity assessment, and what is the benefit that you get, is it ensures that the provides manufacturers a proven method of demonstrating compliance to a particular standard, and also empowers end users to make better purchasing decisions. I would rather prefer a product that has been certified as complying to a particular standard than a self-certification from a manufacturer. It increases also the likelihood of a stable technology in the market, having robust products. So I just talk about few types of standards conformity assessment programs. One is the first party, where the manufacturer says I'm complying to the standard. Then the second party is where the purchaser says I understand you are complying, but I have an internal process by which I want to ensure compliance. And what we are talking about in this program is really the third party conformity assessment, which is an independent body, in this case IEEE, which certifies that the manufacturer is actually conforming to that particular standard. Then next 4 to 5 minutes, I will talk about some of the examples that is relevant in the ICT and energy space. That is the focus today within some of the highlighted standards that I'm going to talk about. One is TV white space. It's also known as IEEE P802.22. The prefix P stands for the fact that it's a project. That means it's a standard that's under active development today, wherein people can come together and participate, be part of the working group and contribute ideas or learn and observe. So the idea of the TV white space is to essentially, Moira spoke about connecting the unconnected or connecting the next billion. There are various views of it. A lot of times taking connectivity to the rural is not easy. For example, in India, we have a significant mobile smartphone penetration or mobile phone penetration, but not significant amount of broadband penetration. Broadband costs are still significantly high, data costs are high. So this is a technology where we are using the TV white space spectrum to enable that backhaul where we can transmit data and connect the rural masses. In fact, there is a pilot that we did, and the image that you see is a pilot that was done in Kenya, where with the title of Microsoft Beams Internet into Africa using TV white space. The chair of this particular project is Apurva Modi from BAE Systems. The next one is frugal 5G. I'm not sure from the audience here in the room and on the phone how many folks are actually working in this particular space. Now that seems to be the buzzword. After IoT, everybody wants to join 5G and develop products on 5G. And if you look at the implications of 5G, what it means, they talk about extremely high speeds, very low latency. But having said that, in emerging economies and developing countries, and I come from India, and we are part of the emerging economy, our requirements are very different. We do not need that kind of speeds, but what we do need is a primary broadband access. How are we enabling that? What are the requirements that go into the primary broadband access? So this particular program that's coming together called Frugal 5G is talking about the middle mile connectivity led by Professor Abhay Karandikar. Then we talk about low voltage DC Microgrid program. It's also IEEE, known as IEEE P2030.10. As you know very well here, and it's happening rest of the world, we are seeing a significant emergence of solar implementations, microgrids. Some of them are rooftop solar, some of them are community-based solar, and microgrids are coming everywhere. So in this case where everywhere there is an installation of a microgrid, how can we standardize the architecture of this implementation? Because what that essentially does is, going back to a few slides where I talked about giving a platform, enabling different manufacturers to provide on a particular platform, would also enable adoption of this particular technology and brings the cost down, and also ensure that people are able to work and maintain on these, because we are working on standardized architectures here. But one aspect of it is connecting people who do not have any access to electricity. But there are other advantages of low voltage DC. One of them is efficiency. We are moving from AC power to DC power. Some of the changes that have happened in the last 10 to 20 years has made this transition to happen. Transmission is no longer a bottleneck. If transmission or long distances was a key point, then you go with AC technology. But now with rooftop solars, transmission is not an issue. So emergence of DC is having a significant play. That, along with the emphasis on renewable energy, is really making this a very valuable proposition. The chair of it is Wayne Gusto from Nextech Power Systems. Along with that, we have an IEEE Smart Village program from the IEEE Power and Energy Society, where they are going to remote villages and powering them using solar microgrids. And when I say remote villages, I'm talking about Himalayan villages, like where accessibility is extremely difficult, the terrain is extremely difficult. Very interesting program within the IEEE. IEEE 1547 is a very key standard that we are working on, and that dovetails very nicely into the last standard that I talked about. Here we talk about So last time, the 2030.10 is about rural and remote application and DC. Now, what is the considerations when you have these kind of microgrids that are actually connecting to the AC power supply? You know, so there is off-grid and connected grid supplies. So you have to have certain considerations how you design these distributed resources, how you design the DR island, and what parameters you need to consider when you connect these microgrids to utility supply. IEEE 1547 is talking about it. This is a very critical standard, and we are also looking at a conformity assessment program, and we are discussing in Kenya how to do a pilot of this particular program in Kenya. Next, I want to talk about, and this is the last standard I touch upon within a glimpse. We have, of course, 1200 standards that Moira talked about. Then I will probably bore you to death by talking about 1200 standards, and I picked the relevant ones that we thought will be very interesting for today's conversation. The next one is the electrical worker safety or National Electric Safety Code, as we call it, and it talks about the safe installation, operation, maintenance of electric power and communication utility systems. It's very important. A lot of time when we open a newspaper, we talk about all these accidents that has happened because of people not complying to certain standards when they installed a substation or a transformer, and this happens in such a regular basis, we have almost not even thinking about it. I think it's very critical to go back and rethink this in many areas where we are not complying to certain standards, and this includes aspects of power substations, the communication overhead lines, and also the underground lines. In fact, Pakistan did an adaptation of it, the Pakistan Energy Council, and they released the Pakistan Electric and Telecom Safety Code that was based out of the National Electric Safety Code. And it's interesting when they do the adaptation of it, regional requirements come into play. I always say the only way to make global standards is to have global participation. A lot of times, even with the best intent of the people at the table who want to make the standards global, we do not know what are the requirements. For example, camels are common in Pakistan. So the overhead transmission line, the height might have to vary because the kind of foot traffic that they have is quite different to what you have perhaps in the United States. So we always understand that, and it's important to capture those requirements. Next couple of slides, I just talk about Standards University, very important platform within the IEEE. It is important to understand that we also work with the research, academic, and student community. Students, whether they realize it or not, are using standards in their daily life. Everybody has a phone, they connect to the Wi-Fi, they are using power which is based on standards. So the educational platform that we provide has different aspects to it. There are courses that you can take through MOOCs, that is the massively online open courseware. You can also apply for a grant, an educational grant. I will talk about it in a minute. There are videos, and we also have a quarterly e-magazine which is free to subscribe. You get a quarterly magazine focused on a particular thematic area. I talked about the educational grants, and this is typically students in many colleges and universities do a project, end of year project or an internship. So the idea of this particular program is if you can show how the project is enabling you to understand or implement or design to a particular standard. It doesn't have to be an IEEE standard, it can be any standard. And the project enables the use of standard while implementing that particular project, then they can submit a simple one-page form highlighting that aspect of it, and the Standards Education Committee provides a grant to the student. It provides $500 for the student and $300 for the faculty. At the end of the project, the faculty gets it, but the student gets it as soon as it's approved. And Microsoft is actually supporting this grant for submissions that are coming and approved from Sub-Saharan Africa. There's a link there that you can take a look at for the grants that have been approved. Also, on one end, we talked about the students, but we also want to talk about the practical ideas for professors. First thing, when students go to industry and apply for a job, is they get asked about what do you know about standards, because it's integral to the industry. So what we are trying to do is how can faculty and teachers incorporate the standards as part of curriculum. And we have various session highlights. All these are available online, and faculty can take a look at it and incorporate these as part of their teaching aids. I'm coming to the last couple of slides. I wanted to talk about collaboration with other organizations. We are not alone in this world developing these standards. There are various organizations that are developing standards, and we always get faced with the question of how do we harmonize standards? How do we bring them together? Especially when, as a user, when you're using a standard or developing a product, you need to understand what is the appropriate standard, and it's better for you to have one standard addressing a space than a myriad of standards. So in that spirit, we have a strong agreements with the other international bodies within the world, ISO, IEC, and ITU. Within ISO and IEC, we have joint collaboration activity where we have a joint working groups that develop the standard together, as well as an adoption agreement where the organization can adopt an international developed standard through the IEEE also. Then we are also a sector member of the ITU in all the three spaces, ITU R, T, and D. And we also have a very strong relationship with IETF, which comes under the Internet Society, and as particularly in collaborating with IEEE 802 community, and also handling the technology governance issues. Those are, we talked about IEEE as an international organization working with other international organizations, but we also understand that there are a lot of regional organizations which have a strong play and an input to developing these standards. And as Moira mentioned in her earlier slide, where we have strong engagement with various government bodies, this is just an example of some of these government bodies, and some of them in Africa. Here we have is with Rwanda Standards Board, South Africa Bureau of Standards, in Zambia, in Ghana, and these are the standards adoption agreements we have done, where the regional bodies can adopt IEEE standards and codify it as regional standards. And also across the world, we have Bureau of Indian Standards, we have Israel, we have Korea. So you can see that, it really, we are trying to ensure we are capturing the requirements globally by working with these partner organizations. With that, I would like to thank you for your time and thank NEPAD, and I would like to hand it over to Ms. Tovella to say a few words before we conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This will be very short and brief. I think just to really express appreciation to IEEE and to Moira and Shri for their time in delivering this webinar to us, but really also just to emphasize the fact that this webinar is being delivered in the spirit of an MOU that is between IEEE and NEPAD. And I think it's important for us as stakeholders, both here at the NEPAD agency and in the continent at large, to really understand the importance of this collaboration in terms of the standards development, but also looking very particularly from our case as a development agency of the African Union, how are we going to actually utilize these standards to enable sustainable development in all these different technology areas. We know that we're living in a time and a space where technology is an embedded and an integral part of our lives, and I think it is important for us to then begin to see how do we integrate this into our various programs, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in infrastructure, whether it's in trade, because at the end of the day, these standards are what will help us to use technology to deliver on our mandate. So I would really like to encourage us, especially because knowing that this webinar is being recorded and we will have opportunity to actually use it in the future, is really just to encourage us to think through very carefully how do we actually leverage this collaboration with the IEEE, how do we begin to think through how we can actually incorporate these different aspects of the capacity building, the fellowships, the adoption of the standards, the adaptation of the standards, engagement with governments, and build that into our programming and our daily work. So with those words, I think I will hand it back to our moderator. I believe it's time for a Q&A.
Thank you, Tovella. So let's head to Q&A. First question. Are these standards mandatory, and how are they incorporated with the country's minimum legislative requirements? Who assesses conformity and approval of the products? If a technology is developed in China, for example, does the product needs to be tested in Malawi?
I can take this question, and if I miss any key aspects, Moira can add to it. I hope everybody is able to hear me clearly. So there were actually two distinct questions. One is, are the standards mandatory? Standards is voluntary. So that means that the development of the standards, the community that comes together on a voluntary basis. The adoption of the standards is market driven, If a market feels that they desire products which comply to a particular standard, then they will push the market, the manufacturers, to ensure compliance to that particular standard. Having said that, there are some cases where it becomes a regulatory aspect. In some cases, in terms of safety, a regulation might say that this particular standard needs to be used in a particular product, in which case it becomes compulsory standard. Okay, so that addresses hopefully the first part of that particular question. The second part on the question was on certification. Very interesting question. Who certifies this? I briefly talked about it, and it also is market driven again. If the market accepts self-certification is enough, then if a manufacturer develops a product and self-certifies that they are complying, and if the market is fine with it, then that's all will happen. In some cases, the market will decide that we want independent third-party compliance. And the underlying question there is who certifies, who does the testing. IEEE is a certification body. We provide the certificate. But I want to clearly highlight here that IEEE is not a lab. We work with global labs around the world, and depending on the market need, we will identify one or many labs, and the manufacturer will actually send the product to that particular lab, which IEEE is engaged with. The lab does the testing, sends the test reports back to the IEEE. IEEE validates the test reports and issues the certification to the manufacturer.
Okay, great, Shri. Thank you for that. So moving on to the second question. Many African countries are currently grappling with energy access. What role would IEEE standards play in addressing these challenges?
Excellent question. And it is not just African countries, it's many countries around the world. I come from India and we have similar issues. I think in the context of energy access, we see a resurgence or a strong emphasis on renewable energy. There is wind, there is solar, there is rooftop solar, there is off-grid, microgrid solar power, and we really see solar energy also becoming part of the government policy and mandates. How much generation should be part of, of your total generation capacity should come from solar. In these considerations, I think the government is taking a very serious view on how to ensure energy access, how to make sure that there is no pressure on generation. But at the same time, when all this is coming up very fast, faster than we think, IEEE enables it through certain strong platforms, through certification and standards development. I highlighted IEEE 2030.10 and IEEE 1547, really two critical platforms to ensure that this development is supported by appropriate platforms. There is a slide that we are showing which is additional IEEE resources that people can also take a look at. I think that has extremely useful information for people in the audience live here and on the phone. Thank you. Back to you, Brett.
Let's do another question. Do you have any standards with regards of using the developed technology safely without any harm to people and environment? For example, the use of nanotechnology.
So on top of talking about safety and harm is extremely critical, very important question, especially today with the wearables, a lot of devices people are using. And IEEE has some very interesting work. For example, there's one particular standard, I believe it's C92, but I'm not remembering the number. It talks about noise, electromagnetic interference, EMI, when we have wireless devices. We have wireless devices in the house. There is always a fear of how it interferes with our safety and health. And there are studies and there are standards which address some safety aspects. We talked about the National Electric Safety Code that talks about how do you maintain safety when we install equipments, that may not be nanotechnology, but having said that, there are a lot of power electronics that are going in today's smart grid technology field. We definitely look at noise and safety to the human. We also have a very new program, which is a pre-standardization work, which we call as digital citizen or future immersive cities, where we are looking at the citizen being at the center, not the technology being at the center. A lot of times we have taken an approach where we develop a technology and then we say, how does this technology work for the citizen? we are kind of changing the problem around within the IEEE, rethinking the problem, and we are putting the citizen at the center and seeing what technologies work with the citizen. And as part of that, especially in the medical space where there are a lot of wearables, we are looking at creating a test bed on the wearable wireless test bed to see how these technologies will interoperate, what is the noise considerations, and hopefully this will be primary consideration as we move forward, and we expect to see a lot more interest from our community addressing the space, and a lot more work coming on the space through the IEEE Standards Association. And if you have any specific idea or work, please reach out to us. We can, if something is not being addressed, there is always an opportunity to address it through our platforms. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. My name is Makinde from NEPAD agency. I just want to know the number of chapters we have in Africa with IEEE Association. I don't know. Then my second question will be, are you trying to achieve a kind of global harmonization with regulations of technologies?
Interesting and tough question. You know, data-specific questions are always tough. But thank you for that question. I can give you some broad ideas. Within the African continent, we have about between 6,000 and 7,000 members. Okay, these are individual members. The number of, we don't call them chapters, we call them sections. So a section is a geographic geo-unit, as we call it. Like, for example, there is a South Africa section, there is a Kenya section, and then we have subsections, which are smaller sections. I do not have a precise number, but we can certainly get back. Do you have a view on that?
I think there are about 10 sections and
10 sections.
about a handful of subsections, but we'll confirm the number.
Okay, we'll confirm that number. Next question on harmonization. Extremely important, very critical. I touched upon it a little bit. As you see, we are cooperating with various organizations around the world. With the European organizations, ISO, IEC, ITU, based out of Geneva, and also the other organizations that are regional from various countries. I think in a world where technology is moving at such a fast pace, industries always will struggle if there are multiple standards addressing the same space. That means that they are developing a product which addresses one market, but then other market is adopting a different standard. That means they have to sell, if they want to sell to that other market, they have to comply to that other standard, and R&D costs are extremely high. So the industries who are integral part of this ecosystem, or apart from the standards bodies themselves, the industries will also help in this organization, because that reduces the cost of developing the product, which means that it reduces the cost of selling that product, cost of the end user, which ultimately enables adoption of that particular product in that market. So I certainly think that will happen. Is it happening as fast as you want? That's a tougher question. I do not know the answer, but we are really working very closely to make sure that it's happening. Back to you, Brett.
So, next question. So without regulations, can the certification of products and services be made mandatory?
Okay, so when we talk mandatory, we usually talk regulation. Otherwise, it's always voluntary. But there is, having said that, the market will push for it. Today, if you buy, let me take a classic example of IEEE 802.11. I don't know, people are familiar with the logo, which is the, I'm drawing a shape here, which unfortunately people on the phone cannot see. Next time we'll do a video webinar perhaps. But the wireless logo, when you have a phone which doesn't have the wireless logo, you kind of challenge, does it support Wi-Fi? And if it does not support Wi-Fi, I would say that 10 out of 10 people are not going to buy the product. So is that mandatory? Perhaps not. But will the market accept it? Perhaps not. So there is mandatory, and there is what the market will push manufacturers to do. I hope that clarifies the question.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shri. One more question from the crowd before we wrap up. So in slide 20, you showed the standards development process flow. Where do you place the industry connection, ICA-ID, and study groups.
Okay. So this is for a standards development process flow. But what we do within the industry connection program, it's also what we call as pre-standardization. It is where we engage with the community before the idea is gelled. So that means that there are a lot of people looking at a particular problem, for example, malware, or even today I talked about the IEEE 2030.10 on low voltage DC. Before the standard was formed, we had an industry connection program where the community said, we are all working on the same problem. We are not clear what is the outcome, is the standard an outcome? Is it a white paper? Is it a thought paper? So those happen in an earlier phase when the technology is emerging. So we have a platform called the Industry Connection Program. It encourages different participants, not just the industries, but also other stakeholders like individuals, government organizations, research to come together and debate about this. And also as part of this, one of the activity they would do is a standards gap analysis. Based on the standards gap analysis, they will decide, okay, there is a need for a particular standard, a new standard, or a revision of an existing standard. Or some of them might say there is a need for an awareness of a particular standard. They will do some trainings and workshops, or some might develop a roadmap of how the technology is going to evolve that will drive future standards, or just a white paper on how to use a particular technology. There is a standard that is there. They might do a guide, how to use this particular standard in practical ways. So there are various options that the platform uses. It is not captured in this particular flow. It is outside this particular standards development process flow, but it's also a platform within the IEEE. Great question, and that's a note to us to have one slide that highlights how that fits into the overall scheme of things. We have a pre-standardization activity, which is the industry connection, standards development activity, which is the flow that I'm showing here, and then the post-standardization activity, where I talked briefly about the IEEE Conformity Assessment Program, ensuring that the manufacturers are complying to certain standards. And we have a slide on that. We will incorporate that slide next time. I think it's a useful slide. Thank you.
Awesome. So this concludes today's webinar presentation. I do want to thank IEEE Standards Association, NEPAD Agency, Sri, Moira, and Toella. Just an absolutely great talk. And on top of that, really one of the more creative and unique webinars that we can provide. So it was certainly an honor to be a part of this. I want to thank all of our speakers again for their time and participation. We certainly appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who could join us. So with that, take care.